Rain lashed against my face, cold and unforgiving, mingling with the hot, metallic stickiness of blood coating my throat. My knees hit the mud with a wet thud. I was done. Spent. My breathing was a ragged rattle in my chest. Every inhale feeling like inhaling broken glass. Is this it? I rasped, my voice barely carrying over the roar of the storm. I gripped the shaft of the spear buried in the earth to hold myself upright, glaring at the circle of assassins closing in. Did the Emperor send you? Or did he not have the stomach to do it himself? No one answered. The only response was the synchronized shing of blades being drawn from sheaths. They were going to cut me down like a dog. After years of fighting for this country, of bleeding for a man I called my best friend, this was my reward. Betrayal. A blade flashed toward my neck. I didn't have the strength to lift my weapon. I closed my eyes, waiting for the bite of steel. It never came. A thunderous clash of metal rang out, followed by a sickening crunch. I forced my heavy eyelids open. A figure had leaped from the mist, a dark blur of violence and grace. He deflected the killing blow with a single, powerful sweep of his sword, sending the assassin flying into the mud. The figure turned. Even through the rain and the blood in my eyes, I knew that silhouette. Broad shoulders, commanding presence, and a scent that cut through the smell of ozone and death, sandalwood and frozen ink. Alexander Sterling, my rival. The prime alpha who had spent the last decade opposing me in the Senate, blocking my bills, and looking down his nose at me. He dropped to a crouch beside me, his large hands gripping my shoulders. His usually pristine suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. Jacob, he growled, his voice vibrating with a panic I had never heard before. Look at me. Where are you hurt? I tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. My grip on the spear failed, and I slumped forward. He caught me instantly, pulling me into his chest. It was warm. So incredibly warm. You're ruining your coat, Sterling, I whispered, blood bubbling past my lips. Shut up, he snapped, his voice cracking. He scooped me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing, ignoring the mud sliding under his boots. Don't you dare speak. I'm taking you to the healers. You are not dying here. Alexander, I murmured, my head lolling against his shoulder. My insides. They're shredded. A healer can't fix this. I said shut up, he roared, clutching me tighter. You don't have permission to die. The irony was suffocating. My family was gone. My friends had betrayed me. The only person fighting for my life at the bitter end was the man I thought hated me. I looked up at him. Rainwater dripped from his jaw onto my face. His lips, usually pressed into a thin, disapproving line, were parted, trembling slightly. He looked devastated. A sudden, reckless urge seized me. Maybe it was the adrenaline fading, or maybe it was just my omega instincts flaring up in my final moments, desperate for comfort. I wanted to leave a mark. I wanted to haunt him. I summoned the last dregs of my strength, reached up, and hooked my arm around his neck. Jacob, he breathed, looking down. I pulled his head down and smashed my lips against his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was bloody, desperate, and fierce. I tasted the rain on his skin and the shock on his breath. I felt his body go rigid, his alpha pheromones spiking in confusion and sudden, overwhelming intensity. I bit his lower lip, hard enough to draw blood, pouring all my frustration and dying defiance into the contact. I pulled back, gasping. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown black, his expression shattering from stoic fear into something raw and terrified. There, I whispered, a bloody grin spreading across my face. Bet you didn't expect that from the unruly Omega. Jacob, why? His voice shook. Remember me. I choked out, my vision tunneling into darkness. Even if you hate it, remember me for the rest of your miserable life. No, he growled, the command tone in his voice failing. Jacob, stay with me. You don't get to do this. You don't get to kiss me and leave. Too late, I breathed. The cold was taking over now. Watch your back, Alexander. The Emperor. The world turned off. The last thing I felt was the frantic, thundering beat of his heart against my ear. Jacob, wake up. I gasped, shooting upright in bed, my chest heaving. My hands flew to my throat, then to my stomach. Smooth skin. No blood. No pain. I looked around wildly. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating familiar oak furniture, my collection of model ships, and the messy pile of clothes on the floor. This was my room. My room in the general's estate. Jacob, honestly, a warm, exasperated voice scolded. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. My mother stood at the door, looking healthy, vibrant, and annoyed. Not pale and wasted away from grief like she had been when she died. "Mom," I whispered, my voice trembling. She walked over and placed a hand on my forehead. "You're not feverish. Why are you looking at me like you've seen a ghost? Get dressed. You have the academy today. If you're late again, your father will have a fit." I grabbed her hand, pressing it against my cheek. It was warm. She was real. "What year is it?" I asked desperately. "Mom, please, what is the date?" She pulled her hand away, laughing. "Did you sleep that hard? It's March, the 35th year of the era. Now hurry up." She bustled out of the room. I sat there, stunned. March. 5 years ago. 2 months before the northern border crisis. 2 months before my father was captured and beheaded, starting the chain of events that destroyed my family. I was back. I had a second chance. "I can fix this," I whispered to the empty room. "I can save them." I got dressed in a daze, pulling on the uniform of the Royal Academy. I wasn't just a soldier now, I was a student. And I had a lot of work to do. "Jacob, over here." I walked into the academy courtyard, the chatter of noble sons and daughters filling the air. Prince Edward stood near the fountain, waving at me with that practiced, gentle smile. In my past life, I had thought he was the kindest alpha in the kingdom. I had worshipped him. Now, looking at him, all I saw was the man who had signed my death warrant. "Your Highness," I said, bowing slightly, hiding the venom in my eyes. "You look tired, Jacob," Edward said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Rough night." "Something like that," I muttered, stepping out of his reach. "We should get to class." "Mr. Sterling hates tardiness." Edward laughed. "Ah, yes. My dear Uncle Alexander. He is rather stiff, isn't he? Don't worry, if he gives you trouble, I'll smooth it over." "I'm sure you will," I said dryly. "Just like you smoothed over my father's execution." We entered the lecture hall. I took my seat, slouching low. The door opened, and the room fell silent. Alexander walked in. He looked exactly as he had in my memories, though younger. His jaw was sharp, his movements precise. He wore a severe black suit that accentuated his height. The scent of sandalwood drifted through the room, heavy and controlling. He wasn't the broken man holding me in the rain. He was the ice prince, the strict tutor. "Open your texts to page 42, Alexander commanded, his voice deep and resonating. "Today we discuss the geopolitical implications of the southern trade route." I stared at him. I couldn't help it. My mind kept flashing back to that rain-soaked mud. The way his lips had felt against mine. Soft. Surprisingly soft for a man made of stone. He turned from the chalkboard, his gaze sweeping the room before locking onto me. His eyes narrowed. "Jacob," he barked. I jumped. "Yes, sir." "Is there something on my face?" he asked coldly. "Or do you find the wall behind me more fascinating than the lesson?" The class giggled. Old Jacob would have flushed and stuttered. New Jacob, who had died and come back, didn't give a damn. I propped my chin on my hand and grinned. "Not at all, Mr. Sterling. I was just thinking. You have excellent posture. Very commanding. It suits a prime alpha." The silence in the room was deafening. Alexander blinked, taken aback. A faint flush crept up his neck, visible only because I was looking for it. "Pay attention to the lecture," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "And sit up straight." He turned back to the board, but I saw his hand tighten on the chalk until it snapped. The weeks passed. I played the part of the bratty student, but my eyes were open now. I watched Edward manipulate the court, whispering poison about Alexander. "My uncle is too ambitious," Edward would tell me over lunch. "He wants the throne. We have to be careful." In my past life, I believed him. I helped Edward undermine Alexander at every turn. But now I saw the truth. Alexander was the only thing holding the kingdom together. One afternoon, during a self-study session, a classmate named Nathaniel, a slimy beta who loved gossip, slid a book onto my desk. "Check this out, Jacob," Nathaniel whispered, snickering. "It's the latest band romance novel, The Alpha's Runaway Mate." I rolled my eyes but opened it. It was trash. Pure, unadulterated smut about a misunderstood warlord and his feisty captive. Give it back, I whispered, trying to shove it into my bag. Mr. Sterling, Nathaniel suddenly shouted, pointing at me. Jacob is reading pornography in class. The room froze. Alexander was at my desk in 2 strides. He held out his hand. Hand it over, Jacob. I sighed and placed the book in his palm. He looked at the cover, his eyebrow twitching. Since you find this literature so compelling, Alexander said, his voice silky and dangerous, why don't you read a passage for the class? Edward stood up. Uncle, please, Jacob didn't mean. Sit down, Edward, Alexander snapped. He looked back at me. Read. Now. He wanted to humiliate me. He expected me to beg. I stood up, grabbed the book from his hand, and cleared my throat. I flipped to a random page and projected my voice to the back of the room. Oh, Commander, the Omega breathed, arching his back as the Alpha's large hands spanned his waist. I hate you, but you're sent. It drives me mad. Not me right here on the strategy table. The class gasped. Someone choked. I looked Alexander dead in the eye and continued. The commander growled, his voice like thunder. You are mine, little one. I will bite you until everyone knows who you belong to. I slammed the book shut with a grin. It's a metaphor for political annexation, isn't it, sir? Alexander stared at me. His face was completely blank, but his scent, that cool sandalwood, had spiked with something hot and spicy. Anger? Or arousal? Detention, he said, his voice strained. My office. After class. Looking forward to it, I chirped, sitting down. The spring hunt was the turning point. In my previous life, I had let Edward win to boost his ego. This time, I rode my horse like a demon, claiming the most kills. At the ceremony, the king, Edward's father, currently sick and frail, clapped weakly. A fine display, Jacob. A true general's son. You may present the victor's flower to anyone you choose. Traditionally, an Omega victor would give the flower to the Alpha they wanted to court. Edward stepped forward, puffing out his chest, expecting the white rose. I walked right past him. I stopped in front of Alexander, who stood by the king's side. He looked at me, his eyes guarded. I bowed low and held out the rose. For the finest teacher in the academy, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. And the only man here who actually knows how to hold a sword. The court went silent. Edward's smile froze. Alexander looked at the flower, then at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of that same devastation I had seen in the ring. Then the mask slammed back down. You are trying my patience, Jacob, he murmured, taking the flower. I'm just paying my respects, I whispered back, winking. That night, the celebration was in full swing at the palace. I drank too much wine, my head swimming. I needed air. I stumbled out into the royal gardens, the cool night air soothing my flushed skin. I leaned against a stone pillar, closing my eyes. Suddenly, I felt a presence. Before I could react, a hand covered my eyes, and I was shoved back against the stone. Warm lips crashed onto mine. It was hungry, possessive. The person tasted of wine and sandalwood? No, it was too distorted by the alcohol for me to be sure. I melted into the kiss, my body humming with a familiarity I couldn't place. It felt like the kiss I had given Alexander before I died. The stranger pulled away just as I reached for them. By the time I peeled my eyes open, the garden was empty. Who was that? I whispered, touching my swollen lips. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a terrible idea. I needed to know if that kiss was real or if I was just desperate. I'm going to the Velvet Lounge, I announced to my empty room. The Velvet Lounge was a high-end club, essentially a glorified brothel for the nobility. I marched in there, slammed my money on the counter, and shouted, Bring me your best Alpha. I need to compare a kiss. I was escorted to a private room. I sat on the bed, waiting. The door opened. Finally, I slurred, squinting. Come here and kiss me. The figure walked into the light. It wasn't a gigolo. It was Alexander. And he looked murderous. Explain, he growled, locking the door behind him. Alexander. I blinked. What are you doing here? Did you come to have fun too? He stalked over, grabbing my chin and tilting my head back. You kiss me in the garden, and then you run here to find a substitute? Is that how low your opinion of me is? My heart stopped. Wait, that was you? In the garden? Who else would it be, he hissed. But, what? I stammered. You hate me. You're the strict, boring teacher. I have never hated you, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I have spent 10 years watching you, protecting you, and waiting for you to grow up. My eyes widened. 10 years? Alexander, you're only 25. He froze. He realized his slip-up. I stared at him. The intensity in his eyes. The way he looked at me like I was a ghost. You remember, I whispered. The rain. The assassins. You were there. Alexander let go of my chin and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. So you figured it out. You came back too? I asked, standing up on shaky legs. I woke up the moment you died in my arms, he said, his voice ragged. I have lived this hell for months, waiting for the timeline to catch up. Waiting to see if you would make the same mistakes. You remember the kiss? I asked, my face heating up. He let out a dark, humorless laugh. Jacob, that kiss is the only thing that kept me sane. You kissed me, told me to remember you, and then died. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I wanted to annoy you, I admitted weakly. Well, you succeeded, he growled. He closed the distance between us again, pinning me against the wall. You succeeded so well that I am not going to let you out of my sight this time. You are not going to Edward. You are not going to the war. You are coming home with me. Is that a kidnapping, Mr. Sterling? I asked, my breath hitching. Call it protective custody, he murmured, leaning down until his lips brushed my ear. Pack your things, Jacob. You're moving into my estate for remedial tutoring. Living with Alexander was torture. Sweet, agonizing torture. He told my parents I was failing my classes and needed intensive supervision. They thanked him profusely. I was locked in his guest wing, forced to study strategy and politics all day while he worked in the next room. But the dynamic had shifted. We both knew the truth. One evening, I was lounging on the rug in his study, pretending to read a scroll while watching him work. The candlelight flickered over his sharp features. You're staring, he said without looking up. You're handsome, I replied. It's distracting. He put down his pen and sighed. Jacob, please. I am trying to prevent a civil war. I crawled over to his desk and rested my chin on his knee. The Emperor is dying, isn't he? Just like before. Alexander stiffened. Yes. The bells will ring any day now. And Edward? He's making his move, Alexander said grimly. He's poisoning the king's medicine. I have the evidence this time. When the king passes, I will arrest Edward for regicide. And then, I asked softly, who sits on the throne? He looked down at me, his gaze intense. I never wanted it in the first life. I let Edward take it because I thought he was your friend, and I thought it would keep you safe. I was wrong. He reached down, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. I will take the throne. Not for power, but because I need the power to keep you alive. You'd become a tyrant for me? I teased. I would burn the world for you, he said. He wasn't joking. I swallowed hard. Okay, then let's do it. But Alexander, if we change history, if we win, what are we? What do you want us to be? I stood up, straddling his lap, ignoring the way his breath hitched. I don't want to be your student. I don't want to be your rival. Then what? He rasped, his hands settling on my waist. I want to be the problem you can't solve, I whispered. I want to be yours. He didn't hesitate this time. He kissed me, and it wasn't the desperate kiss of a dying man or the stolen kiss in the dark. It was a claim. It was deep, slow, and full of promise. His scent wrapped around me, heavy sandalwood soaking into my pores. You have always been mine, he murmured against my lips. Since the moment you punched me in the face during our first year at the academy. I broke your nose, I laughed breathless against his mouth. And you stole my heart, he replied. Terrible trade. The bells tolled 3 days later. A deep, mournful sound that echoed across the capital. The king was dead. We marched into the throne room. Edward was there, feigning tears, ready to accept the crown. When Alexander walked in, flanked by the royal guard, Edward's face went pale. Uncle, Edward stammered. What is the meaning of this? Edward, Alexander said, his voice projecting through the massive hall. You are under arrest for the murder of the king and conspiracy against the state. Lies, Edward screamed. Guards, seize him. No one moved. Alexander threw a stack of documents onto the floor. The evidence is irrefutable. The apothecary has confessed. Take him away. As the guards dragged a screaming Edward out, The room fell into a heavy silence. The throne sat empty. I stepped forward. I walked to the center of the room and dropped to one knee. "The king is dead," I shouted, my voice clear and steady. "Long live King Alexander." A ripple went through the crowd. Then, one by one, the generals and ministers knelt. "Long live King Alexander." Alexander walked up the steps to the throne. He didn't sit immediately. He looked at me. A silent conversation passed between us. We did it. Peace didn't last forever. History has a way of correcting itself. 2 years into Alexander's reign, the northern tribes invaded. The same war that had killed my father in the first timeline. "I have to go," I told Alexander in the war room. "No." He slammed his fist on the table. "Absolutely not. I have generals. I have armies. They don't know the terrain like I do." I argued. "Alexander, I fought this war for 5 years in the last life. I know their tactics. I know where they will ambush us. If I go, we end this in 3 months. If I stay, thousands die. I can't lose you again," he whispered, turning his back to me. His shoulders were shaking. I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist. "You won't. I'm not the reckless boy I was. I have something to come home to now." He turned around and buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply. "If you get so much as a scratch, I will execute the entire medical staff." "Deal," I smiled. I rode out the next day. The war was brutal, but I was prepared. I anticipated every trap, every flank. We crushed them. 3 months later, on the final day of the siege, I was in my command tent, looking over the surrender terms. The flap of the tent flew open. I looked up, expecting a messenger. It was Alexander. He was wearing black armor, mud spattered on his cloak. "Your Majesty?" I gaped. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the capital." "I got bored," he said breathlessly, crossing the room in 3 strides. "And I missed my husband." "We aren't married yet," I pointed out, laughing as he hauled me up into his arms. "Technicality," he muttered, kissing me hard. "I'm announcing it the moment we get back. And I'm making you the High Marshal. You can run the army, I'll run the country." "And who runs the house?" I asked, running my fingers through his messy hair. "You do," he said, his eyes softening. "You run everything, Jacob. You always have." I smiled, resting my forehead against his. Outside, the soldiers were cheering for the victory. Inside, everything was quiet and warm. "Alexander." "Yes. I'm glad I kissed you that day in the rain." He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "If you hadn't, I would have chased you into the afterlife and dragged you back myself." "I believe you," I whispered. He kissed me again, and this time, there was no fear, no death, no looming tragedy. Just the scent of sandalwood, the warmth of his skin, and a future that belonged entirely to us.